love and oneness. Bongo Manasco. Say the bongo manasco. Bongo manasco. Been giving you the warning. The new day has dawned. I hope you are prepared. The bongo man is here. Bongo man has him call. I are going to Zion, going to Zion. If you follow politicians, you will never come out. Never come out. You will never, never, never. And if you follow heads of churches, you will never come out. We are going to Zion. I hope you are prepared. The bongo man is here. Say the bongo man has him come on now. Him Natty Congo, I ask him, come on, the bongo man is here. Him call. You will never, never, never. And if you follow heads of churches, you will never come apart. We are going to Zion. I hope you are prepared. The bongo man is here. Say the bongo man has him, come on now. Him come. Natty Congo, I ask him, come on, Nana. Him come. Rastafari. Say the bongo man has gone. Him love and oneness. Bongo man has say the bongo man has
You know, I've always found it strange. People really want to save money, but are so willing to toss their hard-earned coin into a 3-foot pool of disappointment.
Good evening. And welcome to this evening's edition of Politics 101. It's a Monday evening. We come to you, of course, with the news that Jimmy Cliff, reggae's first superstar, has passed on. has passed on at the young age of 81. The young age of 81. Jimmy Cliff, a household name to generations, starting with the generation of the 60s. He gave us so many hits in those early years. Jimmy Cliff. Our gift to the world, our Caribbean, I've said here over and over. We've given the world many gifts in song, in dance, in sports. We give the world the greatest musical genre, calypso, and out of calypso came reggae. Reggae first emerged in the early 1950s as ska, morphed into rocksteady in the late 1960s for a brief period of 18 months, 18 glorious months. And then that gave way to reggae. And then, of course, dancehall in the 1980s. And today, we have a coming together of all facets of reggae music. Jimmy Cliff, born in 1944, like so many of our storytellers, he came from humble beginnings. He first hit the scene in the early 1960s as a ska singer. He, along with Alton Ellis and others, would take ska music to the international scene. But it was in the early 1970s, when Jimmy Cliff hit the scene. He was the star in the first Jamaican film made by Jamaicans for Jamaicans, where the stars were Jamaicans. The harder they come, Jimmy Cliff was the star in that movie, The Harder They Come. And the music for that movie, the music for that film, was Jimmy Cliff's music. And the music became the first reggae album. First reggae album, Jimmy Cliff, not Bob Marley, Jimmy Cliff. The first reggae album. Wonderful World, Beautiful People. Oh, my generation would remember that well. Wonderful World, Beautiful People, Jimmy Cliff. The first reggae album. Jimmy Cliff starring in the first Jamaican movie, The Harder They Come. Jimmy Cliff, the first reggae superstar. That movie put reggae music on the world map. And Jimmy Cliff was there. That first album, Wonderful World, Beautiful People. So many wonderful songs. Many Rivers to Cross is a forever classic, speaking about the struggles of the African and West Indian, constantly crossing rivers, many rivers to cross. Constantly crossing rivers, constantly crossing waters, reaching for higher heights. Sometimes I feel like committing some dreadful crime, but only my will keeps me going on. Many Waters to Cross became an anthem for the struggles of African people all over the world. The harder they come, the harder they fall. The defiant spirit of the African, of the West Indian. The harder they come, the harder they fall, one and all. Talking about pushing back against oppression, and fearing no one. The harder they come, the harder they fall. And who can forget Vietnam? Vietnam, the anti-war anthem of our generation and generations to come. The mother getting the call that her son has died in war. Vietnam. Jimmy Cliff. Before Bob Marley, before Peter Tosh, did for us Caribbean people mark our name on the canvas of the world. Before Michael Manley, before P.J. Patterson, there was Jimmy Cliff. Bongo man has come, bongo man has come. Oh, and that beautiful voice. That beautiful voice. Thank God. Thank the ancestors for sending him our way, so that he could speak for us, of us, and with us. Brought joy to so many of us. Wonderful world, beautiful people. Wonderful world, beautiful people. And Jimmy Cliff continued through the years. He had something to do with Bob Marley. Remember, Jimmy Cliff had signed with Island Records in England. He was their star. Bob Marley had left school and wanted to sing, and they wanted to name him Adam. And Jimmy Cliff said, no, not Adam. So he retained his name, Bob Marley, Robert Nesta Marley. Jimmy Cliff had something to do with that. And it was after the movie, The Harder They Come, that Jimmy Cliff felt he was going nowhere fast enough with Island Records. And he decided to part ways with them. And as Island Records will tell you, when Jimmy Cliff walked out the door, in walked Bunny Wailer, Peter Tosh, and Bob Marley. And the rest is history. And that movie, The Harder They Come, was about the record producers robbing the singers, the reggae singers, not giving them what was due to them. But the movie became a reflection not just about what was happening to reggae singers, but what was happening to the people of Jamaica and the Caribbean. And the Caribbean. The harder they come, the harder they fall. That was 1972. I think by 1974, we in Guyana got our own first Guyanese movie, Agro Seaman. I was still a child in high school. And thanks to our teacher, our English and literature teacher, Mr. Paul King, he's somewhere now in Canada. But about 5 or so of us students from Buxton Secondary School, Buxton Government Secondary School, got parts in that movie. We went down, took us down to Tongan. We auditioned and we got parts. I remember playing the part of little schoolboy towing my classmate on the bicycle, and at the corner there, Freedom House and that cinema there, the seaman knocked us over. The seaman would go to people's place and pretended that he came from the furniture stores and repossessed their stuff. Wonderful world, beautiful people. The early 70s. Jimmy Cliff was a product of the Black Power movement. That generation of the late 30s and early 40s. Peter Tosh and Bob Marley and Bunny Wailer. Before them, Jacob Killer Miller. Clive Lloyd. Rohan Kanai. Walter Rodney, Tim Hector. That generation that came at the tail end of the decolonization movement, and so therefore launched the independence movement, their independent sons and daughters. Jimmy Cliff has gone back to the ancestors. It's gone back to the ancestors. But his voice will never die. His songs will never die. He is the quintessential Caribbean man. He's the quintessential voice for the voiceless. He's the quintessential voice of African liberation. He's the quintessential Caribbean voice, constantly having something to say, something to tell the world, something to remind the world, something to remind ourselves that we come from a civilization and we are a civilization. The harder they come, the harder they fall. Sometimes I think of committing some dreadful crime. I'd rather die than to live as a slave. Thank you, Brother Jimmy. Today, as I perused Facebook more than I normally do, and I see the young, the old, and the in-between, white, black, and brown, paying tribute to the great icon. I feel so good to be West Indian. I feel so good to be a Caribbean man. I feel so good to be a black man. With whom and with what you identify. That's where the identity comes from. And they tell us, oh, why you worry with identity politics? We identify with ourselves. We identify with the best in us. And Jimmy Cliff represents the best in us. A lot of the reggae stars went before him. Jacob Miller went very early. Bob Marley, very early. By the time he was 36. Peter Tosh, very early. Bonnie Wailer lived long when he recently went back to the ancestors. Alton Ellis and the great ones. Goodbye, Peter. Goodbye, Bob. Goodbye. We said goodbye so many times. And today we say goodbye to the original reggae superstar, Jimmy Cliff. Good evening. Good evening to you. And welcome to Politics 101. So much to talk about. Today's Monday. Today's what I call MP Day. This morning I was on Camps TV, Brother Kidaki, where I go every Monday morning, spend some time fielding calls from people on what I call MP morning to talk about issues that are of interest to us. Because the National Assembly is not just the physical parliament, but it's everybody's business. And what we intend to do is to bring the parliament to the people. And so Wednesday morning, I take calls there, and Wednesday night, I spend there dealing with the issues of the day. And they say Parliament is a place of debate. I don't very much like the term debate, but I know what they mean when they talk about the debates, the discussions. And this morning we began to talk about the issue of the EU, the European Union observer team that gave a preliminary report, but then they handed over the full report on their views on the 2025 Guyanese election. And my God, it caused quite a stir. The president, Dr. Brother Irfaan Ali, went berserk. You would think that somebody is overthrowing his government the way the man went off and accused the EU of being in bed with the opposition, that they were fed what they were fed by the opposition. I called it hypocrisy. And that may be a mild word to describe what the president was engaged in. Because if you go back to the 2020 election, the EU was here, the OS was here, CARICOM was here. They all were here. And they all pointed to some problems with the election. But they said the PPP won the election. And of course, we had Order 60 and the recount. Many of us still believe that that recount was unconstitutional. But they went ahead with the recount anyway. And what the recount showed was that the PPP engaged in a lot of rigging of the 2020 election. We know what the story is. People who voted who were not in the country. "48 boxes without statutory documents." Those are the more extreme. But the EU and others said the PPP won. And I remember Nandalal saying to us, "Shut up. What are you all talking about? What's in the box and who was in the country and who wasn't in the country and voted? What are you all talking about? All the international agencies said we won, so we won." That's what they said. When the PPP was asked of proof, what is the proof that you won? The international agencies, all of them said that. The Americans, as they would do, a year later, they slide in and said the government was installed. But the PPP told us they won because the international agencies say they won. So they set a standard by which you evaluate elections. Once international agencies say you win, you win. That's what the PPP told us. They set a standard. Well, fast forward to 2025. the EU took the lead. They repeated what they said in 2020. But this time they amplified it. Flawed voters lists. No biometrics to ensure the identity of voters and to guard against voter impersonation. But they went further. They zeroed in on some things that we took for granted. They talked about the use, the abuse of state resources by the PPP. The abuse of state resources. They talk about the abuse of the media. The monopolizing of the media. Over 90% of media coverage going to the PPP. They talked about the lack of campaign financing, which means that the party in government can spend state monies and buy votes. What the EU in effect said was this. They said the PPP won a stolen election. That the election was free but not fair. And so the PPP won an election that was free but not fair. When I say free election, they mean that the election happened, people participated in the election, parties were able to participate, it was free. You know, it wasn't one party election, it was multi-party. But it was not a fair election because the playing field was not fair. The electoral architecture was flawed. And so therefore, the conclusion is that the PPP won an election that was not fair. Put another way, the PPP is in office through a flawed election. The PPP like to tell people, go bring your SOPs. Go bring your SOPs. Well, the EU is saying the SOPs don't matter when the voters list is the same size as the population, which means the list is so bloated that the scope for thieving is wide and broad. No, let us go back to the PPP's standard for judging election, adumbrated by them in 2020. And that is that once the international people say it's free and fair, it's free and fair. Well, the international people now are saying it wasn't free and fair. And instead of accepting that, they're now cussing the international people. Well, the international people can answer the PPP if they want tomorrow. But Guyana is not their country. They have an interest in Guyana. It's not their country. The PPP is hypocritical. They change the rules of the game as they go along. Here is what is clear. The PPP has no intention, no intention of agreeing to free and fair elections. It is the nationalists in people like me and in all of us doesn't accommodate easily the fact that white people have to come in and say something wrong before we accept that it's wrong. We know it's wrong and we've been saying it's wrong. You know, when white people say it's wrong, it gets more attention. And that doesn't sit well with us in nation. But we have to be pragmatic and realistic to say we live in a world in which ultimately what happens at the level of our politics and economics are determined by external forces. Professor Rex Nettleford, in an interview with me several years ago, said globalization is a new designation for an old obscenity. And that obscenity is the desire by the first world to control the rest of the world. And so slavery was globalization. And what we call today globalization is just a new form of global slavery. And we in these parts can barely protect a little of our sovereignty. And so the reality is that if the rest of us says it, the PPP cares not. They cuss us. They will jail us if they get their way. So it takes the white people to come and say it. But unless the white people have an interest in removing an illegitimate government, they're just going to say it and leave it there. The PPP government is an illegitimate government. It lacks legitimacy. Legitimacy means that a wide cross-section of the people in the country feel that the government has a right to govern. And that is not so. At least half of the population, half of the electorate, which includes those who voted against the PPP and those who stayed away from the election. When you add them together, they're saying, we do not believe that the PPP has a right to govern. And tacitly, the white people saying that the PPP don't have a right to govern. And so the PPP lacks legitimacy. I heard Jack Yo talk about mandate. What mandate? You can't have a mandate when you lack legitimacy, when more than half of your population feel that you do not have the right to govern. For all the talk of landslide, as I've pointed out several times on this program, the PPP got 9,000 more votes in a rigged election. In a rigged election. The voters list was rigged. The mechanism for voter identification was rigged. Access to the media was rigged. Access to resources to fight an election was rigged. And with all that rigging, They got 9,000 more votes than what they got last time. The opposition were the victims of rigging. And they lost votes. The PPP wasn't victims of rigging, but all they got is 9,000 votes. More than the last time. Some cynics will ask, well, if they rig, how come they got just 9,000 votes? If they rigged, they should have got 90,000 more votes. Well, the rigging is not how many more votes they got, but how many more votes they prevented the opposition from getting. Let me repeat. Those who are, I hear Freddie Kissoon and them, well, if the PPP rig, my God, they're only going to rig themselves 9,000 votes. Well, when you listen to Jack Dio, he said, we got a landslide. He said, we got 7 more seats than the opposition. And he calls that a landslide. And Jack Dio is not a damn fool. And that's where the rigging occurred. It's not how much you give yourself in terms of the number of votes you got than the last time, but how much you denied your opponents. How much your rigging denied your opponents. That's where the PPP benefited from the rigging. You remember mathematicians when they looked at the number of votes that the APNU lost from the last election. They said that it's mathematically not possible. And you now know what they were getting at. How many votes the PPP was able to deny the opposition by the rigging? So you see, sisters and brothers, why we were in trouble as a country. Because when a government comes to office, in the way the PPP has come to office, it is accountable to no one. It's a support base of mostly East Indians. Vote for it based on ethnic loyalty, not based on any policy. Ethnic loyalty. And nothing is wrong with voting based on ethnic loyalty. I have no problem with that. If Indians, the vast majority of them, feel that the PPP is the best party to represent their ethnic interests, more power to them. More power to them. I'm just saying, when African people choose another party or parties to represent their ethnic interests, don't call the leaders racist. And so they're not accountable to East Indian people because East Indian people vote for them because of ethnic loyalty. And Jack Dio said, as he said during the teacher strike, don't worry about all them Indian people who join the teacher strike. When election day, he know where they're going and vote. And Jack Dio is not an Obia man. So he didn't know it because of Obia. He knows it because he understands the sociology, the political sociology of the Indian community and by extension of Guyana. And he doesn't have to be an Obia man to know that teachers may come out and strike against the government, but on election day, they go in and vote PPP. It's an understanding of political sociology that helps you to know that. And he knows that African people are not going to vote PPP. But what the PPP skillfully did is to create so much confusion in the African political mind that the African political mind lost sight of what was happening around them. The PPP pong in their heads. The APNU did nothing for you all. Pong in their heads that we have come to the end of race. Pong in their heads. Norton is not electable. Pong in their heads. And if you look at the data, the PPP, the black vote went three-way. 77,000 for APNU. I think about 75,000 for WIN. And another 70-something thousand stay room. That will carry them up to the 2020 numbers. Split three-way. The PPP got a little sprinkling. They always got a little sprinkling of African votes. Just as the PNC always got a little sprinkling of Indian votes. WIN was able to get about 70-something thousand African votes. About 30,000 or so Amerindian votes. And a sprinkling of Indian votes. So African votes went three-way. And the PPP sowed the discord in the African, they work on the African political mind. And the African political mind, we have to admit, is vulnerable at this time. Vulnerable. There's a feeling that you can't win the PPP. They're looking for some savior. Understand it was a Messiah. We come out of a history of Messiah politics. APNU and AFC couldn't deliver that Messiah. They couldn't agree on the Messiah. So this divided African electorate. Some of them decided to look other way, and they saw in Muhammad this little boy that the PPP beating up. And they suspend their disbelief. You know, when you go in the movie, in theater, they say when you go and watch a movie, you got to suspend your disbelief, because when you see a man up on a skyscraper and he jumped down from the skyscraper and jumped down to the ground and he break a bone, you know that it's not possible, but in order to follow the movie, you got to assume that it's possible. And African people know of the history of Mohammed's, the political history of Muhammad, the closeness to the PPP. But for good or for worse, they chose to blank that from their consciousness and say, boy, here is a Messiah. They went against the grain. The PPP worked for that. I think the PPP was sensible enough to know that they were not going to get African votes. They wanted enough to create the facade of rigging for the rigging. So that when you rig, you say, well, it's not rigging, African people vote for us. So the fact that they only end up in 9,000 votes showed that the plan backfired. Amerindian people peeled away from them. They were hoping to get a couple more thousand African votes, peeled away from them. So they were looking, remember they were talking about 2/3. And they were hoping with the Amerindian vote and a little more African vote, they will get to that 2/3. So when people are asking, well, if they rig, oh, they only rig 9,000. Well, you know, rigging has to fight, you know. Because the kind of rigging that the PPP is doing is the kind of rigging where they're hoping not to get catch. So they're setting traps. And what happened is the traps that they set backfire on them. The Amerindian people got to Muhammad, large numbers. The African people went to Muhammad. So Muhammad is the PPP's sworn enemy, not because of some alleged crime that Muhammad commit. The people could care not about the PPP. It's a criminal cabal. They don't care about Muhammad alleged crimes. That's not their anger at Muhammad. Their anger at Muhammad is as my friend Donald Ramotar said, the PPP beat the bush and Muhammad catch the board. You see, that's the anger at Muhammad. The anger at Muhammad is not no crime that Muhammad is alleged and some smuggling and so on. Smuggling, the PPP been supporting smuggling from the time they came to office. They were supporting smuggling since under Jagan. And Jagan find out what's going on. Oh, my Jesus Christ, he couldn't understand it. The PPP has no problems. The PPP will glad for more smuggling because they're political smugglers. And political smugglers become a haven for other kind of smugglers, economic smugglers. So the PPP are not interested in no gold smuggling and this smuggling because they're smugglers by ideology. They get rid of Marxism, Leninism as their ideology, and they replace it with smugglism. They're the smugglers. Their problem with Muhammad is that Muhammad reaped what they did. They created the confusion in the African political mind. The African political mind was alert enough to say, we aren't going there. But 1/3 of them stayed home, and 1/3 of them try a thing with Muhammad. And the PPP saying, boy, we know we would not have gotten 77,000 like Muhammad. All we wanted was a 10 to 15,000 that we can add on to 9 and make 24 and say we win 24 more thousand. So Muhammad upset the apple cart. When in the process of upsetting the PPP apple cart, Muhammad has set back African politics a long way. Because, you see, the people who voted for Muhammad and who stayed away, their objective was to remove the PPP. That our actions were to remove the PPP. What they didn't calculate that is to remove the PPP, you have to have some Indian votes. And this is where Muhammad cocked them. Because Muhammad knew he couldn't get the Indian votes. At first, the Indian people was giving him some traction. But once the PPP go around in that community with a political gun, Indian people say, pull back. Once the PPP lose their thugs on Muhammad, serious thugs. What bothers me with that whole nonsense is that Indian people believe black people are natural thugs. And even some black people believe that we black people are natural thugs. But when the PPP let loose them Indian thugs on Muhammad, Muhammad knew he ain't getting no vote there. But you know, black people, we have a way in which we sometimes are hopeful beyond the hopeful. Well, you know, some of them will say, don't worry that them Indian people only fooling the PPP election, they're going to vote for Muhammad. Well, they didn't. And so the black people who gamble on Muhammad to do for them what they feel their leaders couldn't do for them, the African leaders, end up holding the bad end of the stick. And that is what played out in 2025, sorry. 2025 is an extension of 2020. But it's much more complex than 2020. The rigging was done through the system. The system is a rigged system. That's what the EU is saying. But when you're rigging through the system has to deliver the numbers to you. But the system has to look for ways to deliver those numbers. And so in the end, what black people did is deny the PPP total compensation for the rigging. The rig, and they get part compensation. And the EU knows that. The EU knows that. What the PPP did, what the EU didn't spend a lot of time on or spend any time on, was voter suppression. They suppressed the African vote. Tremendous voter suppression. The voter suppression occurred with those who stayed home. The voter suppression occurred with the dividing of the African vote. Jadjo was very clear. The PPP didn't win Region 4. They got the most votes in Region 4. But when you add the votes of the others, it's more than their votes. But they end up getting the chairmanship and vice chairmanship of Region 4. Because the logic of the division of the African vote meant that when they got it there to vote, win up on one side, APNU up on one side, and PPP walk in. So when Dr. Jeffrey, concluded correctly that Win didn't have to go to the PPPs and say, I collude with you. The very presence of Win leads to benefits for the PPP. So in the two regions where black people dominate, where PNC dominate, Win presence allow the PPP to get in Region 4. And Win presence will allow the PPP to determine who governs Region 10. Y'all listen to me. This is young people say deep shit. Win's presence, the vote that African people gave Win, the logic of that vote leads to the PPP controlling the destiny of the two centers of African political power. unintended consequences, yeah? I am being fair to the Win people, the black people who voted for Win. They wanted to defeat the PPP. They didn't take into consideration all the factors. So at the end of the day, the vote that they gave to Win, the logic of that vote, the consequence of that means that the PPP now has control over Region 4, one African electoral center, and they have the power to determine who runs the next center, that is Region 10. You see, the PPP jumped on my thesis, my approach. I said very early, when I look and I saw where the politics were, I was in no doubt in my mind, no, absolutely no doubt. And I know Obeah man. I sometimes glad if I had some Obeah powers, I would have done wonders. This country would be straight. But it's not Obeah. I knew that Indian people were not going to vote against the PPP. I came to that conclusion because of my little understanding of politics and Guyanese politics. See, people have to have incentives. And I asked myself, what are the incentives for Indians voting against the PPP? And I couldn't find any rational incentive beyond, well, you know, morality and the PPP is doing bad and Indian people are doing the moral thing to do is to vote against the PPP. Well, morality and ethnic loyalty don't mix. When people have a choice between morality and ethnic loyalty, they chose ethnic loyalty for obvious reasons. For obvious reasons. And then they construct their own morality within that. So I knew that unlike 2011, when a small number of Indian people moved away from the PPP because there was a Nagamutu, there was an Indian element that was strong enough to draw them away from the CUP. And that was Nagamutu. The Nagamutu effect in 2011 and maybe 2015. If you take Nagamutu out of 2011, 2015, Indians would not have come across to the APNU. And so I knew in 2025, there was no Nagamutu. There was no Nagamutu effect. And so I concluded that Indian people are not going to move from the PPP, not even small numbers, because there was not the Nagamutu factor. And so I concluded the next thing for African people to do was to maximize their numbers in one place, because Indians are maximizing their numbers in one place. And we don't know what the census is. We don't know how many Indians, how many Africans in the population. But you're taking the chance, I reasoned to African people, that you have to assume that your numbers are as close as Indian numbers. And if you maximize your numbers, as they're maximizing their numbers in one place, it then is left to the Amerindian vote to break and to determine who wins and who loses. The PPP spot what I was arguing, and they jump on me and made me and the WPA racist. Imagine David Einstein telling black people, and you get some of the, but and the PPP, the PNC, they're not going into Indian areas. How are you going to win an election? I ain't calling people name because I don't want they cuss me again and say me call the name. But you see them there. Only a fool breaks his own heart. And so my strategy, run up your African vote in one place. And the way you do that is all the African leaders stay together. So you with your 5,000, you with your 3,000, you with your 1,000, you with your 100,000, all of we in one place. And that's an incentive for African to stay one place. The PPP hammer me, and the usual thing, the black leaders never saw that. If they had seen that, they would have done everything to stay together. But they didn't read the politics right. And so they left the pen open by not having a coalition. The APNU and the AFC left the pen open. So Africans who were restless said, I gone. Look, Mohammed, they put their hand in that tar bucket and they dab it on Mohammed's face. You black. You black. Right? You get a tar bucket. Look, Mohammed, you black. And they go to Mr. Steele and they put their hand in the bucket and they dab Mr. Steele. You black. Well, you didn't have to dab anything on Aubrey Norton to say you black. 77,000 people recognized the authentic blackness and heard the message, and they stand for him. They stood for him. There are a lot of young African people today embarrassed. What they now realize what they did, meaning they now realize what their experiment led to. They're embarrassed. I hardly meet people who tell me they vote win. I know a lot of them vote win. They don't tell you. They're shame. And they're the diehards in front of the court and so on. When Mohammed get thing, they will thing and so on. But those who made not an economic decision, some people say, look, Mohammed get your own money and he don't need government money. When he get into government, so he bail out to people. When he was out of government, he gonna share money and bail out when he get into government. You can call it crooked reasoning, but it's real. There's a minority, a tiny minority of Africans who I think went down that road. But I think the rest of the African vote was a combination of I don't want PPP, the PNC, and AFC, Depen's troopiness. And the combination of that led them to take that tar bucket and dab it upon Mohammed. Poor Mohammed can't catch himself till up to now because he didn't expect that. I don't think he understands the deepness of what happened there. I don't think the people around him, for the most part, some of them I think have a sense of it. But I think for the Win people really, I don't think they themselves have made sense of what, if the Win people had a deep understanding of what played out, they would have made some different decisions. If the Win people had come to the conclusion that, look, what we get here is really black people vote. And all they do is dab and they make we black. If they started there, then what in Region 4 would not have happened. They would say, look, we got to keep Region 4 for black people. We got to keep Region 10 for black people. But because this hardness with black people, they don't like to recognize that their race is a powerful thing. They recognize other people's race is powerful, but not their race. So they don't start there. If Win had started and saying, here, 75% of this thing what we get is black people give it here. Which means it's their interest we got to take care of. So wherever we do, Region 4 and going PPP, Region 10 and going PPP, Region 7 and going PPP, if you started, well, you know the usual thing, it's not race, it's a movement. What kind of movement? What do you know of movement? What movement? It's an experiment on the spot. No movement. I would be the happiest person if we had a movement in Guyana. We don't have no movement. Movement is a critical mass of people sharing an interest and come together outside of government to advance that interest. That's what a movement is. It's a critical mass of people with a common interest using the space outside of government to pressure the government to bring about certain change. So you can have a movement for free and fair election, which we don't have. WIN is not a movement. WIN is a political party at best. At best, it's a political party, not a movement. And if WIN had started by being practical and said, we strike gold, and we strike gold because black people try a thing, and we got to take these black people vote, and the Amerindian vote, which is an anti-PPP vote, and keep the PPP out. If they had that political understanding, PPP would not be controlling Region 4. So, black people get cocked all wrong. They believe they were doing something noble. And I am defending them. They believe they were doing something noble. So it is because of that the PPP was able to get back in power despite the rigged election. They fell way short. But they were able to scrape through because the African vote went three-way. The Amerindian vote, for the most part, it looked like 60% of them went to WIN and the others went to the PPP. So even the Amerindians didn't go three-way. The Amerindians went two-way. And so the Amerindians are not hurt as much because they give some of it to the PPP. But Africans are hurt, they went three-way and damage the political thing. Look, you know, all those who were saying the PPP, the PNC need to go out and do work and all that kind of story, man. Sometimes you have to let people have their way, yeah? Because we always look for the wrong places for answers because we're not understanding the politics. One young lady asked me last night, do you think the PPP, the PNC going to come back? And I said, the PNC ain't going nowhere. Come back from where? The PNC ain't going nowhere. The PNC is there. All we have to understand is the dynamics of what happened at the election and fix the dynamics. If African people believe that the system allows for free and fair election, if African leaders behave like African leaders, and you can be an African leader and a national leader. I hear people say, but I'm not, you know, you have to be a national leader. But you're saying Africans don't represent the nation? You can be a national leader and an African leader. People say, look, David Hines all he concerned with is black people. And don't hear that equally when I talk about black, I talk about poor people. And you have poor Amerindians, poor Indians. That our politics is a duality of race and class. And insofar as you advocate a class politics, poor people getting beat up, that's the national. And your communal politics is the ethnic group from which you get your sustenance. And you can't ignore your own picnic. You're concerned about the children in the village, as you must. But you got to take care of your own children first. And the PPP is good at that. Give them full marks. You know, I hear people say, well, Mohammed just go and he stand up and he listen to people and that's how we get votes. No, that's not how we get votes. That's what the people want you to do. They want you to open him out. They're voting for you when you open him out. Put their hand in the tar bucket, you black. Azadin. They want Azadin talk. That's not they want Azadin. Some people say Azadin, just go and listen. You think black people want Azadin talk? They want to talk. It's just a medium through which they're playing their chess game. And so, how do you deal with this thing? Yes, we invest so much in electoral outcomes that when you do so badly electorally, our people feel the world has ended. The world hasn't ended. Because sociologically, the country has not shifted. Indian people remain where they are. Black people remain where they are. Amerindian people generally share around their votes. But the political sociology has not changed. Look, PPP's coming into African areas and holding meetings they didn't do. Because African people, they're humans. They have a sense of humanity. So they don't have a problem with their political opponents coming in the community. What the PPP is doing is that they are strangling the African community of its humanity. And so therefore, the African community, Muhammad going there, and they turn him into a Muslim. He is Indian all the time when he giving orphan bulletproof vest or bulletproof car, and he giving orphan money. He's Indian. Once he now gonna challenge orphan, he becomes the Muslim, and orphan become a Hinduized Muslim, a Hindu Muslim. The political sociology playing itself out. African people dab and say, you black. And Hindu people push their hand in the bucket and say, you are a full man. They do a number. It's political sociology. That is what has made Muhammad. CLR James said, it's not just people projecting things on you, it's whether you have the capacity to absorb which is projected on you. That's the challenge for Muhammad and his people. Do they have the capacity to absorb the energies which have come their way almost by chance? And that will be determined whether they win people, the win party is a passing thing, or it's something that has permanent wings. It's the capacity of the win people to absorb that which was projected on them. You make your choice. You all make your choice about whether they're showing any capacity. I am going to hold my thing. I don't want to be unkind to people. I don't want to be unkind. But that is whether they understand how this windfall come their way. And if you understand how the windfall, then you'll be able to maneuver and construct the capacity to turn that windfall into a permanent something. That is the challenge to win. You got to give the PPP. In this the thing, you got to give the PPP for having a better understanding of race and race politics and ethnic politics than the other players. They don't use that understanding in a worthy way. They don't use that understanding in a constructive way. They use it in a destructive way, but they have a better understanding of the realities of ethnic politics than the leaders on the opposition side. That's why they cost me so nasty, because I peep the card. And I understand it just as how they understand it. But I want to use it in a constructive way, not a destructive way. And so what they do is Heinz racism, and Heinz is destructive, and Heinz is this. They are the destructive ones. Race could be used in an honorable way in Guyana. We recognize that we are racially equal, and we engage in equitable distribution of the resources. That is using race in an honorable way. The PPP doesn't do that. I'm in favor, my party is in favor of ethnic impact statements to show how the resources are being divided ethnically. The PPP is opposed to it. PPP got something to hide. If it turns out that black people getting 75% of the resources and Indian and Amerindian people get 25%, I'll be opposed to that. I'll be opposed to it. If it turns out, as I think it will, that Indian and Portuguese people, Indian and Portuguese elites get their hand in 90% of the wealth, I'm opposed to that. I'm opposed to Indian domination of the economy. I'm opposed to African domination of the economy. I'm opposed to Portuguese and Amerindian domination of the economy. I'm opposed to ethnic domination of the economy, period. And I challenge the PPP. Let us get the numbers out there. And I give my word that if African people control more than 50% of the wealth in this country, I am going to fight to equalize it. I'm not into African domination. I'm for African pride, African dignity, but not African domination. And because I'm not for African domination, I'm opposed to Indian domination. Opposed to it. And my opposition to it comes not from some dislike of Indian people. It comes from a principle that comes from deep inside that says that I don't want African domination, because ultimately African domination will lead to African people losing their way. Because when you're into domination, you lose your soul. And in any case, the philosophical underpinnings of African culture is based on an egalitarianism that is grounded in the equality. When they bought their lands, regardless of who put 10 cents and who put $1 and who put 50 cents, what did they do? They divided the lands equally, because that's our philosophical underpinning. You may put $1, I may put 20 cents, the neighbor may put 10 cents, but when we pool it together and we buy a land, all of us get it equally. That's the African philosophy, Ubuntu. That's why we ought not to be ashamed as Africans and to allow people to get us into becoming this individualist where we're eating up Matty left, right, and center, and the rest of them laughing. The harder they come, the harder they fall. We want Guyana to become a wonderful world and beautiful people. We've still got some rivers to cross. We may not seem to find our way over today, but tomorrow, the beautiful shore on the other side will become clearer if we fight. The Bongo man has come. Bongo man, be not for war. Today they call it a zone of peace in the Caribbean. 60 years ago, Jimmy Cliff said, Vietnam, Vietnam. No more war, no war. Rest easy. Rest in peace, my brother. We are still a beautiful people, striving to create a wonderful world. Love is my redemption. Love is our cornerstone. Let us not stop loving, even when they throw hate at us. Let's love, but let's ground our love in a resistance that sweep away the debris from the path. The harder they come, the harder they fall. Know what you're dealing with. We may be down today, but we shall rise tomorrow. Wailing and weeping tonight, but we know the morning is going to bring, if not full joy, it's going to bring some sunlight. No surrender, no surrender. No surrender, no surrender. No justice, no peace. Everyone is crying out for justice, but none of them. Everyone is crying out for peace, but none of them is grounding that peace in justice. Justice. No justice, no peace. I am giving them the warning, says Brother Jimmy Cliff. We are giving them the warning. It was not always like this, and it will not always be like this. We still got some stones. We still have some fortitude. I'm not saying testicular because that is too masculine. But we got a lot of fortitude left. God is not finished with us yet. The ancestors are not ready for us to come home yet. And even if we are going home, carry me back to my mama country, carry me back home. When me come in, I come with belly. When me go back, me not go back with belly. Come there we go. Are we go away? Come there we go away. Night a come oh, night a come oh. Are we go away? Come there we go away. They are clean oh, they are clean oh. Come there we go away. Go away to come back tomorrow. Dr. Henry Jeffrey is going to be here tomorrow. Lots to talk about. No surrender. Never did. Never will.